Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Real Estate Rundown. Today, I have the special privilege of bringing Lane Kawaoka onto the show. For those of you guys that don't know, Lane has been in the multifamily space for quite a few years and actually has been involved in both the passive and the sponsor side of investing, amassing a portfolio of about 3,500 units all over the United States. So guys, give me a warm welcome here to Lane Kawaoka. How are you, Lane?
Aloha, Shannon. Good morning to you.
So Lane, let's get right to real estate because that's why we're here. You know, one of the things that those of us that know your story, we know that you transitioned out of a professional career as a civil engineer with a lot of schooling, and you've transitioned into a passive investor. Give us that story.
Yeah, so I graduated college back in 2007. Up until then, always been brainwashed to go to school, work at that job for 40 years. As a construction supervisor, didn't like it. And again, following that whole mainstream financial dogma of going and buying your own house to live in, that's what I did. But because I was traveling on the road all the time, it didn't make sense because I was only home on Saturday. So I just started to rent it out. So that $350,000 house that I was living in by a single guy all myself, I started to rent it out for $2,200 a month, and then the mortgage payments were $1,600 a month. And to a young 20-something-year-old kid, that was a lot of beer money. And I was like, shoot, I got to do this again and again and again, and get out of the rat race. That was where it all started. I didn't know anything about rent-to-value ratios, primary, secondary markets, none of that. I just knew that I was making a little bit of cash flow, and I just had to rinse, wash, repeat.
How hard was it, Lane, to change your mindset from being someone that had been taught your whole life that you go to school, you get a good job, you get an engineering job? I mean, that's a great job. I have friends that are engineers. They're really smart. They do very well for themselves. But typically, you're working for somebody else. Did you struggle with getting your mindset switched? And if so, how did you change that to make yourself the entrepreneur you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I never had parents who did this type of stuff. I never really had any family members who did rental properties. But to me, it's just made so much sense, right? Well, I have a few $100s of cash flow every month, even though some stuff breaks along the way, and then just happens like clockwork. That was where I tried to get a little more educated, started reading the books, the podcasts. And then I think a key for me was getting around other people doing it too. And I realized this stuff wasn't that hard, and I could scale it. I could see the path forward, and that was where the motivation happened. And my goal for the next maybe 5-10 years was just keep stacking these chips up, these cash flowing properties, so that I could replace my income. That was goal number one.
How long did that take you, Lane, from 2007?
Well, I eventually did quit my job maybe a couple years ago. But the problem was I probably stayed in it a little bit too long. I'm not one for jumping off the cliff and taking the dive, the entrepreneur dive. For a lot of us, and a lot of my clients that I work with were high paid W-2 workers, right? Our highest and best use are working at the day job.
And that's kind of what we like to focus on this portion of the show is just you've created passive income, and you've got a real knack for doing that with people who are working professionals who are already busy. They're already working 60 hours a week. They don't really need a second job. How have you found that successful niche where you're able to get high income earners like yourself into that passive income stream?
Well, I kind of like it because nobody else does it, right? Everything else out there is for mainstream folks who make under 50 to 80 grand a year. A lot of free internet forums. The local RIAs are all just a bunch for broke people. Let's be honest. I mean, people go to local RIAs, either experienced flipper who's trying to get, these new people to lend them money, or the new people are just trying to get unbroke. And then they hear real estate is a great way to get rich, which it is. But what they don't realize is, this the way I look at it, this is the long game. This is the get rich slowly kind of game.
Right.
I mean, I bought my first property in 2009. I didn't buy my second property, which is a duplex, until 2012. And then you just kind of buy one after one after one. Around 2015, I had 11 properties. That was where I started to go out of state. Bought them in Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis. Like you hear a lot of these turnkey properties. Had a property manager that managed, three of them in the three states. But I realized it wasn't really scalable to own rental property, and I learned that firsthand. But the most important thing was I started to up level my network. So I started to join different masterminds, and I found other doctors, lawyers, engineers, and they were all doing the same thing I was, but maybe 10, 20 years older than myself. And they were all saying, yeah, we all bought rental property at one time, but we all laugh how it was such a pain in the butt to operate them and just wasn't a scalable investment strategy.
Right. And you hear that a lot, but it's kind of like your college 101 course, right? You kind of got to take it to appreciate what true passive income is, and being in the limited partnership where you're not having to deal with toilets and trash. Um, but when you got to that place, you're talking about turnkey rentals. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so turnkey rentals is a very like loose term, right? Some people will define it as a proper rehabber will take a property and maybe let's just call it 40 grand. Like it's kind of a trash property. They'll buy it distressed, and then they'll maybe put in maybe 30 to 80 grand into it, and they'll fix up all the major components, the roof, the HVAC, they'll paint it surely, they'll put in new flooring, they'll put in maybe they'll resurface the cabinets. Maybe they'll put in completely new cabinets, right? I mean, they're putting a lot of work into this. They're making it more for a rental grade tenant, and they're buying in these rental grade areas, so they can do all this for you, and even they can put a tenant in there and they can even manage it for you if they have the property management in house. So for a unsophisticated investor who lives 2,000 miles away or even past the ocean, I mean, it's a great option to start off with. Of course, they go to all the internet sites and they go to all these do-it-yourselfers, and they say, "Oh, you're overpaying." But I mean, for high-paid working professionals, to me, that's the way to get started. Maybe your second or third one's not going to be a turnkey, but at least this teaches you how to swim on the shallow side of the pool, and then you can ramp it up yourself if you want.
There's so much truth in that too, because while you're not having to do the manual labor, you're still able to get involved with the income stream and the tax side of things. As you know, the tax side of this game is as important to play as the income side, because that's really what offsets with W-2 people like yourself. The tax game is really, really advantageous. What were some of the things that you found to be super great about real estate once you got into it from a tax advantage?
When you're dealing with single family homes, you're just taking the normal depreciation, so 1/27th of the value of the building every year, which is okay. But it gets really exciting when you start to get into these LP deals where it's large enough where you can do a cost segregation and aggressively write off sometimes like a third of the building value all in year one. So investors, if they put in a sample investment of 100 grand, I've seen people get anywhere from 60 to over $100,000 in the first year as passive losses. It's crazy. Here's kind of where it gets really complicated. And I'm not a CPA, but I've done this a lot of times, and and I tell folks that they need to learn this for themselves so that they can guide their CPA or tax attorney the right way, or figure out when they need to find a new one. But these deals are going to kick off a lot of passive losses, but you as a W-2 employee may or may not be able to take it. What you need to do is you need to take it on as W-2 worker. You need to be a real estate professional. Right now, today, I don't have a day job. So there's kind of a two-part test. Number one, you cannot have a full-time job. You can possibly be working a half-time job and still qualify to be a real estate professional. But even though you qualify on the hours, you need to have 750 hours of active participation in your portfolio. So that's the harder one. And every situation is different, but that is the conversation you need to be having with your CPA, right? And you need to point them you need to force them to have that conversation, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was a W-2 employee, I always just did it the easy way, right? And that's no different from any other um, professional, even CPAs. You can't just go to a CPA and have them, do it for you. Really, you have to tell them and force them, and which is the right way, which is usually the harder way for them to do their job, and maybe a little bit more, I don't know, riskier from a tax audit standpoint too. So now you can kind of see why you have to kind of force feed and take and be empowered yourself. But today, what I'm able to do as a real estate professional, because I'm actively working into my projects and deals, I'm able to take these passive losses, which I have hundreds of thousand or a few $100,000 at least, and if I want to pay less taxes, I can use that to offset my active income if I want. But I normally, for folks that are under $150,000 adjusted gross income, AGI, usually the sweet spot is to be around 10 to 15%. But for our doctor clients, that are around 300,000 AGI and above, certainly above, probably about 20 to 27% is a good overall tax rate. But yeah, I mean, a lot of guys move to Puerto Rico like yourself, but I don't know, when you're real estate professional status and you're able to you don't need to, you don't barely pay any taxes. I mean, last year I paid like 4% effective tax rate. It's crazy.
You said something there about training your CPA. I think that's a question that I get. That's probably one of my top 5 questions that people ask is, how do you find a good CPA that knows all this real estate? And I think your answer was similar to mine. You don't. You find the one that you got and you train them, which means that you're doing the research, you're doing the digging, you're coming up with the tax solutions that you're talking to them about, because accountants put stuff in boxes. And if you tell them to put it in this box, they will. But if you don't, they'll put it in the easiest box for them.
Yeah, I mean, most times it's not like, I think 80% of them won't do any of this stuff. They want to just do it the lazy way. And it's typically they've had their practice a while. But I get it. If you're more established, you don't need to do this type of stuff, right? You don't need to change your ways. You don't even need to read the latest tax changes that comes out every couple of years or so. I think the thing is you need to find a CPA who is willing to do it, number one. Because you can educate them all they want, but at the end of the day, they're the one that's sort of like stamping and sealing. And secondly, you need to do it that they're able. Like the way I look at these guys is they're sort of like just contractors. I mean, they're just the one filling out the paperwork, right? There's different methods for why you would fill it out a certain way. That's where I think you as the investor need to be just as empowered as them and know these type of things. You don't need to know which forms to do. That's their job, right? But you need to generally know what you're kind of be doing with your situation. I mean, yeah, I give my clients referrals all the time, but I give them a big caveat saying, hey, you need to learn this stuff and here are the things to ask and the things, to guide them through the way. So yeah, like property managers, people to work with, it's all referrals first, right? But even if you get a good referral, they should just go to sleep on you, right? And do it the lazy man style.
Yeah, for sure. So, Lane, once you've kind of in your mind graduated from, realizing that maybe single family homes and duplexes is going to take way too much of your time, way too much effort, and you've stepped into deciding that you really want to be part of the LP and a syndication, what are some of the tips that you have, the advice that you would give people on how to come up with a good plan to vet your syndicator, how to know when you've got a good deal? What's the kind of advice you're giving people with that?
For me, it's 50% the numbers and 50% the person. So how do I vet the person? It's all through my personal network. I don't work with anybody who I don't know. I need to know somebody personally that has invested with in the past. That's the gold standard. And I know a lot of people, they don't know anybody who's doing this. So I've gotten burned. I got a referral from some people who I didn't know before, and that person ran off with my money, right? So lesson learned. Don't do that. And you find a lot of people, they're like, oh, so-and-so is good, so-and-so is good. But you find that they've never even invested their own damn money with the person, right? So the gold standard is somebody that you trust that doesn't have a skin in the game, not going to get a referral fee because that's illegal anyway for, in terms of securities world or anything like that. But then the other half is, like I say, people lie, numbers don't lie. if you're able to get the P&Ls and the rent rolls and run your own comps, you can run it through, your own model, your own spreadsheet, and figure out what you're working with. And that's what I'm able to do. And that's why my method is I get all that stuff first and I figure out what kind of assumptions this operator is using, such as what kind of reversion cap rate are they doing? Are they doing like a half a point or more? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that expansion on that reversion cap rate, because I want them to assume that the market is getting worse. I don't want them to assume that the market is staying the way it is or getting stronger, right? I want these things to be truly conservative instead of just repeating the damn word again and again and again. I want to know how it is. Another big thing is like I don't want to see rent increases of 3% or more as a rent escalator assumption, right? And a lot, just take those two things. If you were to underwrite it the right way, that affects the bottom the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet, right? So that's why I keep forcing folks to look at, like, what are the assumptions? Who cares if they're promising 100% in 5 years? If you normalize their assumptions, you increase the reversion cap rate, or you decrease their annual rent escalators to 2% instead of 3.5%. That 100% return in 5 years could quickly go down to 40% return in 5 years, right? So those are kind of the two ways. Verify the numbers by checking the assumptions, and then only work with people like, or trust.
A lot of people are relying on the GP, and as we've seen in any market when it heats up, there's been a lot of people join the party that may or may not have the experience in dealing with the product type. I've got an ex-banker friend. He always tells me, you can make the spreadsheet say anything you want. You just have to be smart enough to understand what they're trying to say in the spreadsheet so that you can reverse engineer it. So that you can understand, like you said, that a 3.5%, right? 3.5% of rent assumption, that may have been true for the last couple of years, but I don't think that that's going to play out in 2020, right?
Yeah.
And if you're looking at the long game, you're going to assume a 3%, maybe a 2%. If you get down to the end of it 10 years from now and you've achieved a 3.5, nobody's going to be mad at you for over delivering.
It's all about just making sure that the deal is underwritten the right way. Most investors, I would say 80 to 90% of LP investors don't have a clue how to do this, right? And they're investing off the pitch deck. And anybody can make a PDF pitch deck these days, right? I mean, the whole key is to just get a designer to do it for $50 and make it look pretty polished. I would say I got a very similar story to yours, right? Like an investor, it's like, oh, what didn't you like about the deal? It's like, well, this one was 105% over 6 years, and this other one was, 95% over 5. And I was like, all right, well, what did they use for assumptions, right? And sure enough, they're using those high assumptions and lower reversion cap rates. And I'm like, well, what did you want to see, man? Because I can change this number, I can change this number, I can change this number. Like, what number do you want to see at the bottom page? We can change it however you want.
Right. And when you get to that point, it's not based on reality. It's based on giving somebody the warm fuzzies, which by the time you get there in 10 years, they're not going to know the difference because they're not going to remember the pitch deck. But it's all about integrity. Like you said, you've got to know the guy. You've got to know somebody that's invested with them. You got to know somebody that's made money with them. You've got to know their past, because that's going to dictate what your future is going to be with them.
Operators, after they've had a few good deals, what you call this is sponsor creep. Fees will start to go up. Splits will get better for the general partner, not for the LPs. And what's worse is sometimes the underwriting standards will start to go down. It happens all the time. And if they have a good investor base because they've made the first round of people happy, good for them, right? They can do that. But if you're a new passive investor looking to go into soundly underwritten deals, that may not be aligned with what you're looking for. It's hard because these things aren't commodities, right? Every deal, even from the same sponsor, is different. It's not like buying a Apple stock. Everyone is different. And unless you're able to get into the underwriting, you're not going to be able to compare apples to apples.
When you start asking the questions, sometimes the underwriter or the GP can't quite answer them. And, another big, huge red flag is if they get defensive about their assumptions. When they're trying to tell you that, well, this is what's happened historically, this is what we're going to be able to do, there's no problem. That's telling you that they're selling instead of simply presenting you with the opportunity for you to decide.
Or it could be the opposite too, right? I mean, if they got like people lining up around the block because they've done good, and they could just, hey man, like we always do the reversion cap rate of 3/4 of a point. We're way better than most people. Some people are reversing the reversion cap rate, and this is their numbers. If you can't see it, you'll find out in 3 to 5 years when your deal sucks, right? I mean, and
Right.
also it could work the other way, right? Some people are really good marketers, and they have people lining up around the street to come into their deals. They just put it out there, and
Yeah.
these suckers will invest. I mean, you don't know,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I stopped going to a lot of real estate conferences, because there's a bunch of new operators, and dude, I can't even tell who are legit these days.
So, Lane, what are you seeing with, where we're at today with the world that's changed so dramatically in 6 months? I mean, what are you seeing that doing what's left of 2020 and what you've got on your plate for deals?
Normally deals, they take about like 60 to 90 days to kind of go in the oven before it pops out to LP investors. In terms of, April, May, June, nobody was really going and checking out properties, right? Lending kind
Right.
of shut down a little bit. And I think now people are finally kind of getting back out there, looking at properties. Yeah, you might see some things come out. Like, I think there's a storyline out there that people are going to be going through foreclosures, or people that are in forbearance right now are going to get, really in trouble in the next few months after it burns off. That's probably true, but like me personally, that doesn't really apply to myself. If you're looking at properties that 80% occupied or less, then that will possibly impact you or be maybe a nice windfall. But for the most part, I'm looking at stabilized properties 90% or more with value add. If a owner had a property and they went to forbearance and they stopped evicting people, they may have a class B property, but after 2 to 3 months of continually not evicting tenants, you quickly train your tenant pool going from a class B to a class C or F. And I wouldn't want to
Right.
buy that in the first place. That's not my business plan. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's a bad business plan. I'm sure you can make a lot of money doing that stuff, but that's just not me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that do. So when you're looking at your business plan and what you're putting out there and what you're moving forward with, are you looking at improving the property, or are you just looking at buying something that's undervalued that you can, through better management, bring up to market? What is your overall strategy?
Yeah, so it's got to be 90% occupied or more for the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac non-recourse debt. But like you said, it's a little bit of both. I mean, we're not going in there and doing huge upgrades. I mean, maybe we're working with like a $4,000 to $6,000 budget per unit. So that's new flooring, new appliances, but we're not getting into the big stuff like cabinets and stuff like that, right? Very, very basic stuff. But what we're looking for is maybe a $50 rent bump on just on the management, right? Of course, a $50 rent bump just on buying an undervalued deal. That's the key, right? That's why we buy 1 in 1,000 deals. Not all of them are like that. But then the forced
Right.
appreciation by going in there doing that minor work, basically putting lipstick on a pig, we're able to bump those rents even more, another $50. So
Right.
that's kind of the model, right?
And
I mean, it's to me, I don't. The returns are pretty good, I think. I mean, I think it's the one of the best
yeah.
risk-adjusted returns, right? Because if should the economy turn on you, you just hold in cash flow, and you have all your capex raised, you're good. You kind of just shelter in place and continue your rehabs internally, and you can sell at the right time, and you're already in a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, long-term loan.
On your inside going in, are you sticking with that 85% loan to value, or are you raising more funds with that moving into the end of 2020?
It doesn't. It hasn't really changed from that perspective. I mean, we still try and go in with. We try and get as much debt as they give us, right? As the agencies will give us.
Yeah.
That can range from 80 to 70%. The banks are increasing the amount of cash reserves. So we kind of just go along with what they say that we need on every deal is different, right? Different markets. The banks, it can play around plus or minus a few percent points on the debt to income, with the loan to value from that perspective.
when you see your ability to sell, and you're in that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, non-recourse, 221 product, do you see that there's going to be a windfall there when you're able to have an assumable debt at 3% and rates have crept back up to 6.5?
We just closed a deal earlier in the year. It was like 3.2%, 15-year term, and it was assumable. So I mean, we might even, if we take a long time on this deal, like we might even be able to have it be assumed with still 10 years, 12 years. I think we're maybe getting a little bit too detailed here, but a lot of times those assumable loans, they'll be paired with like prepayment penalties. So that's a big thing. I mean, we're in a deal right now where we're ready to exit, but there's just a big, nasty prepayment penalty. Normally today, what we like to do is go into a more hybrid loan where it's sort of a step down on the interest rate or the prepayment penalty should we finish early.
Back to the people getting into the game, you're right. We're getting a little deep here. Maybe those were little personal questions that I have always wanted to ask somebody like yourself. But when you're looking at a new person that's wanting to get involved in it, and they've understood the part where they know they need to be the passive investor, they've got a great day job, what is some of the best reading material that they can get their hands on to understand what their easiest course of action is going to be and how to educate themselves to be ready to be the best LP they can be?
I think there's not really too many good books out there. I think a lot of this is just seeing live deal flow, right?
Which means you're going to write one, right?
I don't like books personally. I think they're kind of boring. Actually, I have an e-course on this stuff. You click the button and you read a blurb and you click the next button. So I have a syndication, LP investor syndication. That's the way I've created it. But like, to be honest, the best way is just to I have people, they just go through a bunch of older deal webinars, right? Like, how do you hit in baseball? Well, you just watch some pitches by, right? Different curveballs, fastballs. You just take some live batting practice after a while. But then I think a lot of this is like you have to expand your network, right? Because I think when people learn academically, they start to get a skewed perception. And I think they need peers to calibrate themselves. They need to hear what other people who have actually invested in the past and saying, yeah, you're fixating on most times people fixate on the wrong stuff and they waste their time on the wrong stuff, right? Like I think we're just talking about like the whole, the yield maintenance and then like the prepayment penalties. Like, dude, don't worry about that. Focus on the reversion cap rate, the rent increases per year, and do your due diligence on the comps that they're using, right? Don't just take their comps. You go look at it a little bit, right? Can they really get 950 for that type of product? That's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
So I have like a little LP checklist with, all the questions you want to ask, how long have you been in business, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like interviewing a property manager, and then a little bit of, things to check in underwriting, like you don't want to see anything on the rent increases too high as escalated reversion cap rate. What is full occupancy? What is full economic occupancy that you want to be seeing? Just so I think from that perspective, as an LP, you're not going to be an underwriting specialist, but you wanted to develop this checklist of your own to be able to ask on like the sponsor's track record and their underwriting to at least spot out the sucker deals.
No, that makes a ton of sense. From where you're at right now, looking back on your investing career, what would be the one piece of advice you would give them to have accelerated your career?
I would say, figure out where you fall on like the net worth spectrum, right? Like if you're under $500,000 net worth, in my opinion, you should still keep buying rental properties on your own. You're not a passive investor at this point. You either need to make more money or save more money. A lot of guys, they come to me and they hear about the benefits of multifamily, multiple roofs, yada, yada, but they're just kind of following the marketing breadcrumbs. Look how I did it. 2009 to 2015, I was just plugging away, buying single family homes, getting my net worth up to that threshold. But if you're a credit investor, you certainly have a net worth over $500,000, $1 million. This is where it's at, in my opinion. I thought turnkey rentals were the best thing since sliced bread, but obviously that's changed. And I'm not going to say that I'm not going to change my mind on the syndication stuff, but this is how I invest, because I've been in groups of higher level investors, and the name of the game is to go, $50,000, $100,000 into a couple dozen deals. And that's your portfolio. Right. You're diversified with different partners, different asset classes, different locations, different business plans. You're getting the great tax benefits too along the way. That's kind of what I help clients too is the more on the consulting side, on the tax side, right? How do you pull it all together with the infinite banking? Because deals is just one part. Deals part is a big part of it, but for high net worth investors, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Well, Lane, we really, again, appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us here on the show. And everybody, be sure and send in your questions so that we can get those to them and figure out where we're going on our next show. Thanks, guys, for joining Real Estate Rundown. We'll talk to you soon.